The bell at Meadow Creek Elementary had barely finished echoing across the playground before kids started spilling out, laughter ringing in the late afternoon air. Backpacks bounced, sneakers squeaked, and the parking lot hummed with the familiar chaos of Friday pickup. Near the edge of the curb, Zoe Carter, small, solemn, 7 years old, sat cross-legged on the bench, twirling the frayed end of her pink scarf. Her gaze darted between the school's brick pillars and the slow procession of cars, searching for a familiar silver Subaru and her mother's waving hand. Today, the air felt different, thick with a kind of energy that made even the teachers stand a little straighter. Near the flagpole, Shadow, the school's therapy dog, a retired canine German shepherd with a grizzled muzzle and wise, watchful eyes, paced in slow circles, his handler chatting with the principal. The dog's presence usually meant comfort. Today, it seemed to mean something else. A hush swept the curb as a man approached. And he moved with the kind of confidence that belonged here, gray hair slicked back, a charcoal coat draped neatly, and a smile stretched too tight. He knelt down in front of Zoe, voice soft. "Hey there, Zoe. I'm your grandpa. Your mom asked me to pick you up today." Zoe blinked, her heart stuttering. Something about him, maybe his smell, sharp like aftershave and stale cigarettes, or the way he didn't quite meet her eyes, felt off. She remembered Grandpa Ed's hugs always smelled of cinnamon cookies, not smoke. Shadow, 20 feet away, stopped dead. His ears pricked forward, his body taut as a drawn bowstring. The dog's low growl began as a tremor and deepened, echoing across the parking lot. Parents turned, teachers paused mid-conversation. The man glanced nervously over his shoulder. Zoe hesitated, clutching her backpack to her chest. "My mom never said anything," she whispered, voice trembling. The man smiled wider, flashing a badge and a sheaf of papers. "Court orders, honey. It's all right. I just need you to come with me." Something flickered behind his eyes. Shadow's growl became a bark, sharp and jarring, snapping every adult to attention. A teacher hurried over, radio already raised, and within moments, Officer Deanna Evans jogged up the steps, hand on her belt, eyes calm but alert. "What's going on here?" Deanna's voice cut through the tension like a blade. The man straightened, producing his paperwork. "Official custody," he repeated. "Zoe's my granddaughter. Her mother knows." But Zoe shrank back. She shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't smell right. He's not my grandpa. Grandpa smells like cinnamon, not cigarettes." A ripple ran through the crowd, adults exchanging uncertain glances, unsure whether to trust the man's documents or the trembling child and the growling dog. Deanna frowned, scanning the papers. Everything seemed in order, but something nagged at her. Shadow lunged forward, body coiled in defense, wedging himself between Zoe and the stranger. The man tried to step around the dog, but Shadow bared his teeth, hackles raised. "Easy, boy," the man said, voice tight. Deanna's radio crackled. She kept her eyes on the stranger, reading the room, and caught Zoe's terrified glance. The man's hand dropped to his briefcase. Shadow's nose twitched, and in a blur he was at the bag, pawing and barking. The crowd gasped as the case tipped open, out spilled zip ties, a vial of something cloudy, and a pink baseball cap embroidered with unicorns. A collective shudder ran through the adults. Deanna's face hardened. "Step back from the child, sir. Now." The stranger froze, color draining from his face. Parents ushered their kids away. Zoe, gripping Shadow's fur, felt tears well up, part terror, part relief. She buried her face in the dog's ruff, whispering, "Thank you, Shadow. Thank you." In the distance, sirens wailed. The world shrank to Zoe, Shadow, and the pounding in her ears. Minutes later, as officers cuffed the man and led him away, Zoe found herself surrounded by adults, their faces pale and shaken. Her mother arrived, running, voice breaking as she called her daughter's name. Zoe clung to Anna, trembling, her words jumbled. "He said he was Grandpa, but he didn't smell right." Shadow knew. Shadow sat quietly, eyes never leaving Zoe, a silent sentinel in the chaos. As the sun dipped behind the trees and Meadow Creek emptied out, one thing was painfully clear to everyone. Something far darker had nearly unfolded. And it was only the quiet vigilance of a scarred old dog and the small voice of a frightened girl that had kept disaster at bay. By the time Zoe and her mother were led inside the school building, the crowd outside had grown thick. Parents on their phones, teachers herding students, curious faces pressed to the glass of the front windows. The sky, once bright, now felt heavy with storm clouds, but inside, in the echoing entryway at the top of the school steps, everything slowed down. Officer Deanna Evans stood between the silver-haired man and the exit, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Shadow was planted firmly in front of Zoe, low to the ground, hackles up and eyes locked on the stranger. Anna, Zoe's mother, hovered protectively, her hand shaking as she called her husband from the corner. The man kept a smile fixed to his face, but sweat beaded at his hairline. "I'm just here for my granddaughter," he insisted, showing Deanna the court papers again. Her mother must have forgotten to tell her. "Look, everything is right here." Deanna took the documents, fingers steady but jaw tight. Her eyes flicked from the paperwork to the man's face. "I need you to wait right here, sir." She gestured to the bench along the wall. He hesitated, then sat, his briefcase clutched in his lap. Shadow circled, nose working furiously. Zoe, pressed against her mother, could hardly look up. The man's words echoed in her mind, "I'm your grandpa," but every part of her body screamed that it wasn't true. Deanna's radio buzzed in her ear, the dispatcher's voice clipped and professional. "No custody orders on file for Zoe Carter. Mother listed as sole guardian." Deanna's eyes narrowed. "Sir, I'm going to need to verify your ID with the front office," she said. "Do you have any other identification?" He fumbled through his wallet, producing a license. His hand trembled. Deanna examined it, her brow creasing. The photo was him, but the name, Gerald Carter, meant nothing to her. A teacher, Ms. Ramirez, approached quietly. "Zoe's never mentioned a grandfather. Anna's parents passed away years ago, and that's not her father's name." Deanna nodded, adrenaline sharpening her focus. She stepped back, voice low. "Zoe, I need you to tell me, do you recognize this man?" Zoe's eyes brimmed with tears. "He doesn't smell like Grandpa. Grandpa made cookies with me. He smells like cigarettes and something sharp." The man bristled. "She's just confused. It's been a long week." But Shadow, responding to Zoe's fear, let out a thunderous bark, startling everyone in the foyer. He lunged, body blocking Zoe completely, teeth bared. The briefcase rattled in the man's grip. "Whoa! Call off your dog!" the man snapped, voice cracking. Deanna signaled another officer. "Open the case, please." He balked. "There's nothing, just business papers." But the second officer took the bag and clicked the latches. The lid popped open. Inside, a tangle of zip ties, a small bottle labeled chloroform, and on top, a pink baseball cap Zoe instantly recognized. "My hat!" Zoe cried, her voice thin with shock. "That's my hat! I lost it last week." A gasp rippled through the staff and parents clustered nearby. Anna's face drained of color. Deanna's fingers clenched. She stepped closer, voice steel. "Sir, you're under investigation for attempted abduction. You need to stand up, turn around, and keep your hands where I can see them." The man's mask cracked, rage, then panic. For a split second he seemed to consider running, but Shadow surged forward, a growl rumbling deep in his chest, and the man froze, fear blossoming on his face. As the second officer cuffed the stranger, Deanna's hands shook. The cap, the zip ties, the chemicals. Pieces of a plan that, minutes earlier, had been set in motion. She swallowed hard, eyes finding Zoe. The little girl stared at the floor, fists balled tight around Shadow's fur. "I'm sorry, honey," Deanna murmured. "You did everything right." Anna scooped Zoe into her arms, rocking her gently. "It's over, baby. He can't hurt you." But even as relief swept through the lobby, a new unease crept in. Who was this man? How had he known Zoe's name, her school, the color of her lost cap? And what would have happened if Shadow hadn't noticed, if Zoe's small, shaking voice hadn't been heard? Outside, the sirens faded. News spread through the crowd, what had nearly happened and what had been stopped. Some parents cried openly, hugging their children with fierce desperation. Others simply stared at Shadow, wonder and gratitude etched into their faces. Inside, Deanna knelt by Zoe, voice soft. "Do you remember anything else about him? Did he say anything that sounded strange?" Zoe shook her head. He talked like Grandpa. But his eyes were wrong, and his smile, and he smelled like metal." Shadow, sensing her fear, nuzzled her side, the low thump of his tail, a steady beat. Deanna glanced at the German Shepherd and felt her throat tighten. She remembered all the time she'd doubted a gut feeling, All the moments she'd trusted paperwork instead of instinct. Today, it was Shadow's loyalty and Zoe's courage that had saved a life. The last light of day filtered through the glass doors, falling over Zoe, Anna, Deanna, and Shadow. 4 figures bound now by something deeper than fear. In the middle of the foyer, in the hush after the storm, it was clear. Rules might keep people safe most days, but it was listening and believing that made all the difference. As the police led the man away and the crowd finally began to scatter, Zoe clung to Shadow, whispering, "You're my hero. I knew you'd help me." Shadow leaned into her, his eyes soft and ancient. He had been trained to find danger, but today he had found something greater, a voice that needed to be heard. The clock on the nurse's office wall ticked, loud and hollow, counting down the minutes since the world outside had changed for Zoe Carter. The school nurse had left her alone with her mother, Anna, and Shadow. The old German shepherd now sprawled beside Zoe, his heavy head resting gently across her knees. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and Band-Aids. But for Zoe, everything else, the laughter in the halls, the afternoon sunlight, even the promise of Friday pizza night, felt 1,000 miles away. She sat on the scratchy cot, knees drawn up, arms wound tightly around Shadow's neck. His fur was thick and bristled with gray, but to her it was a shield. Each time her mind replayed the man's voice, smooth, practiced, promising safety, a tremor ran through her. But each time, Shadow's warmth and the steady thud of his tail reminded her, "I am not alone." Anna knelt beside her, one hand stroking Zoe's hair, the other clinging to her small, sock-clad foot as if afraid to let her go. Anna's voice was little more than a hush. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm right here." She was trying to be brave, but tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and helpless. Zoe pressed her face into Shadow's fur. "He knew my name, Mom. He knew everything." Anna swallowed, voice shaking. "He can't hurt you. You're safe now." But she was looking past Zoe, at the dog, at the animal who had sensed what none of the adults had, who had stepped between her daughter and something unthinkable. Outside the office, the world blurred into chaos. Police radios, voices in tense conversation, teachers offering tissues, parents gathering children with shaking hands. Through the glass window, Zoe watched as Officer Deanna Evans paced back and forth in the hallway, paperwork fanned out across a folding table, lips pressed into a hard line. Deanna kept glancing at her phone, at the school's security footage, at the court documents, everything that should have made sense but didn't. Every so often her eyes found the nurse's office door. Regret sat heavy in her chest. What if I'd believed him? What if I'd waited? When the door finally creaked open, Deanna stood in the threshold, hat in her hands. She knelt down beside Zoe and Anna, her voice softer than Zoe had ever heard. "You were so brave today, Zoe." She met the girl's eyes, searching for some flicker of reassurance. "You knew something was wrong, and you said something, even when no one else saw it." Zoe's voice was small. "I didn't like the way he looked at me. But Shadow knew. He always knows." She ran her hand over the dog's flank, feeling the quiet power beneath his skin. Anna blinked hard. If Shadow hadn't been there, her words caught, the sentence unfinished, trembling with gratitude and fear. Deanna cleared her throat, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The man's ID was fake," she said, holding up the license. "His real name is Raymond Bishop. He's wanted in 2 other states, suspected in several missing child cases." Anna gasped, knuckles white as she squeezed Zoe's foot. "Oh my God!" Deanna pressed on, her hands shaking just a little. "The briefcase had chloroform and zip ties. He planned this, Zoe, and that hat he took from you. He's been watching." For a moment, all Anna could do was stare at Zoe, at her child, suddenly so small and breakable, sitting on the cot with her dog. How did he know? Why us? Zoe looked up, her eyes glassy but fierce. "I don't know, Mom. I don't know." The shame in her voice was nearly unbearable, as if any of it could be her fault. Deanna, seeing it, shook her head. "Zoe, none of this is your fault. You did everything right." She reached out, squeezing Zoe's shoulder gently. Shadow did too. The old dog shifted, giving Deanna a long, solemn look. It was the kind of gaze that made her wonder what else he could say, if only he had the words. Outside, a sudden hush fell in the hallway as Detective Marshall arrived. He exchanged a few whispered words with Deanna, then handed her a small, sealed evidence bag. "We found something else in Bishop's car," Deanna said, voice grave. She showed Anna the contents, a plain black USB drive. "We think he kept records, pictures, files. Not just of Zoe. He's been following children. We're going to do everything we can, I promise." Anna nodded, jaw clenched. "I want to help. Anything. Just tell me what we can do." Deanna nodded, her own expression haunted. "We need to know everything Zoe remembers. But for now, she needs rest." She stood and looked at Shadow, who seemed to sense her mood. "You saved her life, big guy." She stroked his head, her own eyes shining. "Thank you." Shadow didn't move, but his ears twitched at the praise. Zoe smiled faintly, curling tighter into him. For the first time since the incident, her breath slowed, the trembling faded. She whispered almost to herself, "It's okay, he's here." Deanna stepped into the hallway, closing the door softly behind her. The chaos outside had quieted, replaced by a strange, weighty stillness, the hush that comes after a storm, when people realize just how close they came to disaster. Later, as evening bled into night, Anna carried Zoe to the car, Shadow padding along at her side. The news had already begun to spread, parents calling, social media lighting up, neighbors sending worried texts. Anna didn't answer any of them. She just buckled Zoe in, stroking her cheek, whispering, "Home, baby. We're going home." As they pulled away, Zoe peered back at the dark silhouette of Meadow Creek Elementary and the glimmer of police lights fading into the distance. She squeezed Shadow's collar, letting his warmth and his breath anchor her. Inside the nurse's office, the scent of cinnamon from Zoe's forgotten lunchbox lingered, just enough to remind anyone who entered that, for one small girl and her dog, today was about survival, about being heard, and about the kind of loyalty that can stand between a child and the darkness outside the door. For Deanna, the questions wouldn't stop. What signs had she missed? What could have gone differently? But as she replayed the footage, Shadow's sudden alert, Zoe's frightened honesty, she found a fragile hope kindling in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, listening with your heart was the greatest skill of all. The Carter house was never truly dark. Even in the thick of night, soft glows from hallway nightlights painted stripes on the walls, and the distant hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Tonight, though, the shadows pressed closer. Zoe lay curled in her bed, covers pulled up to her chin, while Anna perched on the edge of the mattress, reading from a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. But the words fell flat, her voice thin, trembling, skipping lines as she fought the swirl of worry in her chest. At the foot of the bed, Shadow lay stretched out, his paws twitching every now and then, ears occasionally pricking at the softest sounds. He had been invited to stay just for tonight, to help Zoe feel safe, Anna had explained to Deanna earlier. The idea of letting the old police dog sleep on the bed would have seemed silly a week ago. Now, it felt as necessary as breath. As Anna closed the book and kissed Zoe's forehead, she lingered, brushing the girl's hair back and whispering, "You're safe, love. I'll be right down the hall." But even after the door clicked softly shut, safety was only a thin, trembling idea. The memory of the stranger at school, the man's too smooth voice, his fingers curling around the handle of the briefcase, shivered through Zoe's dreams. It was just past 2 in the morning when Zoe jolted awake, heart hammering, a cold sweat on her skin. In her nightmare, she was standing alone in the empty playground, the world dim and silent, and someone was calling her name, soft at first, then sharper, closer. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She opened her mouth to scream. A warm weight pressed against her hip. Shadow. He had climbed onto the bed, his eyes shining in the night. For a moment, Zoe just stared at him, her fear tangled with relief. She reached for his fur, knotting her fingers deep into his ruff. Shadow licked her hand, gentle, then nudged her side as if to say, "I'm here. You're not alone." Zoe lay back, breathing in the old dog's scent, a mix of earth and something coppery and warm. As her heartbeat slowed, she whispered into the dark, "Sometimes I feel too small, Shadow, like nobody hears me." Shadow's tail thumped quietly. He didn't need to answer. His presence was enough. Downstairs, the living room lamp cast a small pool of light across stacks of legal documents, Anna's untouched tea, and her phone buzzing with unanswered messages. She paced, replaying the day in fragments. Zoe's tears, the terror in her voice, the officer's urgent voices. She felt helpless, terrified she'd missed something, terrified it could happen again. The doorbell rang. Anna startled, checking the clock. Nearly 3 a.m. She peered through the window. It was Officer Deanna Evans, her uniform jacket zipped tight, a tired but gentle expression on her face. Anna let her in, barely able to hide her exhaustion. "I'm sorry it's so late," Deanna began, her voice soft. "I couldn't sleep. She paused, rubbing her eyes. "I needed to see if Zoe's okay, and to apologize. I should have trusted her, and Shadow, sooner." Anna led Deanna upstairs. Zoe was still awake, clinging to Shadow like a lifeline. The sight caught Deanna by surprise, a reminder that even old warriors like Shadow had battles left to fight. Deanna sat on the edge of the bed, her voice low. "Zoe, I owe you an apology. I almost made a mistake today. I almost listened to the papers instead of my heart. But Shadow, he didn't care about rules. He just knew. And you did too." Zoe looked at her, eyes wide, searching. "Sometimes I feel like I'm too small to be heard." But Shadow listened. Deanna's face softened. Her hands fumbled for words she hadn't planned to share. "When I was your age, nobody listened to me, either. Sometimes grown-ups forget that kids and dogs see things we miss." Her voice caught, a memory surfacing and dissolving just as quickly. Zoe shifted closer to Shadow, her confidence growing in the warmth of their circle. "Shadow's never wrong," she said, voice stronger than before. Anna, watching, felt a complex relief settle inside her. There was fear still, yes, but something else too. Gratitude. Hope. The room was quiet for a moment. Deanna pulled a small evidence bag from her coat pocket and laid it on the comforter. Inside was the black USB drive found in Bishop's car. "We found this," she explained. "We're going to look through it in the morning, but I wanted you to know, we're not stopping. He wasn't just after Zoe. There are files, names, pictures, other kids." Her voice faltered, the implications too heavy for the room. "You helped stop something much bigger, Zoe. You and Shadow." Zoe hugged Shadow tightly. "Will you come back tomorrow? With Shadow?" Deanna smiled, a rare warmth flickering in her tired eyes. "I will. And Shadow too, if he's not too busy being a hero." As Deanna and Anna left the room, Shadow curled around Zoe, his body a shield, his breath slow and deep. In the hallway, Anna hugged Deanna, tears finally slipping free. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing her, for believing him." Deanna shook her head. "Thanks, Shadow. And Zoe. They reminded me why I became a cop in the first place." Long after the house had gone still, Zoe slept, deep, dreamless, curled into the dog that had seen her, heard her, and never once let her down. The next morning, sunlight flooded the room, warm and bright. Zoe woke to the sound of birds and the familiar scratch of Shadow's tail against the sheets. For the first time in days, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. Downstairs, Deanna was already at the table, her laptop open, the USB drive plugged in. She looked up as Zoe entered, hope flickering in her eyes. "We're going to find them all," Deanna promised. "And you helped us start." Shadow padded over, pressing his head into Zoe's hand. Zoe smiled, a quiet, fierce smile. She was still healing. But with Shadow by her side, she knew she could face anything. By the next morning, the Carter home had shifted from a place of fear into something more like a command center. Anna and Zoe ate breakfast at the kitchen island, sunlight warming the hardwood floors, while Shadow sprawled in a patch of golden light, content but watchful. Every so often, his eyes followed Anna's every move, or flicked toward the door at the faintest outside sound. It was as if, after yesterday, he'd accepted a new job, Zoe's guardian, for as long as she needed. In the dining room, Officer Deanna Evans sat at Anna's laptop, coffee steaming at her elbow, USB drive plugged in. Her face was drawn and focused, gaze flickering rapidly over a dizzying array of files and folders. She'd barely slept, only dozed in the armchair for an hour while the computer churned. When Zoe peeked in, Deanna gave her a gentle smile, the kind that was all reassurance and no pity. "You okay, Zoe?" Deanna asked, voice warm but edged with exhaustion. Zoe nodded, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Shadow nudged her side and she offered him a piece of her toast. "Shadow's staying today, right?" Deanna looked at Anna, who nodded instantly. As long as he wants, Anna said, voice firm. He's family now. Zoe smiled, a spark of joy brightening her face. She ducked down to scratch Shadow's ears, whispering, "Thank you for saving me." Shadow's tail thumped once in reply. Deanna turned back to the laptop. The files on the USB were chilling. Dozens of names, photos, addresses, notes written in cold, careful language. It wasn't just Zoe. There were files on children from 3 different states, kids who lived in small towns, suburbs, even the city. Some were marked with red stars, others like Zoe, with recent dates and maps. And there were emails too, coded but decipherable. Each message built a picture more sinister than any officer wanted to see. She called Detective Marshall, then the FBI. Within an hour, the dining room was crowded with law enforcement. Laptops, radios, maps, and printouts spread across every surface. Shadow watched each stranger with suspicion until Deanna greeted them, then relaxed, just enough to let Zoe's hand rest on his back. "Who's Maya Lynn?" Deanna asked quietly, glancing at Anna. Her file was next to Zoe's. The dates match up. She's a student at Greenfield Elementary, about an hour away. Anna frowned. "I don't know her, but—" She shook her head. "Oh my God, there's more." Deanna nodded grimly. "It looks like she's the next target. We can't take chances. I need to get to Greenfield." Shadow's ears perked, as if sensing a new mission. Zoe wrapped her arms around his neck, her words muffled by his fur. "Keep them safe, okay?" Deanna kneeled down, looking at Zoe eye to eye. "You were so brave, Zoe. You helped us catch a very bad man. Now we're going to make sure no other kids get hurt." "Shadow's going to help too." Zoe nodded, determined. "Be careful." At Greenfield Elementary, the mood was tense but hopeful. Plainclothes officers patrolled the halls, school staff briefed every teacher, and extra parents volunteered to watch the playground and gates. Maya Lynn, a quiet 3rd grader with long black hair and a pink backpack, didn't know why everyone seemed so anxious. She kept her distance from the grown-ups, glancing nervously at the windows. Deanna arrived with Shadow, who wore a new vest marked Police Therapy Dog. The staff, already on edge, relaxed at the sight of the dog. Kids whispered and pointed. "That's the hero dog from Meadow Creek." But Shadow ignored the attention, his eyes sweeping the crowd for something only he would know how to find. Deanna met with Maya's teacher, then knelt down beside the girl. "You ever seen a dog like Shadow before?" she asked gently. Maya shook her head, wide-eyed. "He's very good at finding trouble before it happens," Deanna smiled. "You stay close to your teacher today, okay?" While the officers fanned out, Shadow and Deanna walked the halls and perimeter, pausing at every corner, every parked car. The air buzzed with nerves. One wrong move and another child could vanish. For hours, nothing happened. The day wore on, the tension building with each passing minute. It was just after lunch when Shadow stiffened, nose to the ground, tail straight. He moved toward a silver sedan idling across the street, engine running. Deanna followed, heart racing, hand hovering near her radio. The driver, a man in a baseball cap, watched the school intently, phone pressed to his ear. Shadow let out a low, urgent bark. Deanna signaled the nearby officer, who moved in, fast and silent. As they approached, the man tried to drive away, but another squad car blocked his path. Within seconds, he was surrounded, cuffed, and pulled from the car. In the passenger seat, a map of local schools, photos of Maya, a set of zip ties, and a bottle of pills. The officers shared grim, grateful looks. Deanna exhaled, only now realizing she'd been holding her breath all day. Later in the principal's office, Maya sat with her mother, tears streaming as she clung to her daughter. Shadow wandered in, laying his head on Maya's knee. The girl, shy at first, stroked his fur, her hands shaking. "Thank you," Maya's mother sobbed, looking up at Deanna. "If you hadn't come—" Deanna shook her head. "Thanks, Zoe," she said softly. "And thanks, Shadow. They're the heroes." Back at Meadow Creek, Zoe colored a picture for Shadow, a giant dog with a gold star, guarding a circle of children. She wrote, in careful crayon, "Thank you for saving me." When Deanna returned, she gave Shadow the drawing, tucking it into his vest. For the first time in days, the fear in Zoe's eyes faded. She'd learned what it meant to be brave. And she'd learned that courage could be shared. A spark passed from one person or dog to another, lighting a path through even the darkest day. But as Deanna reviewed the case files late into the night, she realized the web was wider, the threat deeper. Yet for the first time she felt hope, because sometimes the bravest voice belonged to the smallest girl, and the strongest shield had 4 paws and a heart that never gave up. The rain came hard that Thursday night, rattling on the city windows and washing the neon out of every street sign. At the edge of town, an old rec center buzzed with false calm, folding tables, banners for a made-up charity event, a scattering of parents and teachers sipping watery coffee. But under the polite surface, every person in the room was law enforcement, FBI, or school security. Deanna Evans stood near the back wall, badge tucked away, shadow at her side, both of them tense with anticipation. The USB drive from Raymond Bishop's car had cracked open a new world. Encrypted chats, hidden email chains, and names linking schools across 3 states. The network was bigger than anyone feared. As the evidence grew, it led to a horrifying conclusion. This was organized, calculated, and the traffickers were planning their next move right here, tonight, at this supposed safety night for parents. Shadow shifted at Deanna's heel, eyes never still. He seemed to understand what no human could quite put into words, that real danger moved in quiet spaces, in ordinary rooms, with masks of civility. Deanna kept her hand on his ruff, steadying them both. As parents filtered in, some real, some undercover, Deanna checked her phone for the 100th time. Maya Lynn's mother was here too, anxious but determined, refusing to let fear control her life or her daughter's. Across the room, FBI agents spoke quietly into earpieces, every exit covered, every shadow watched. The plan was simple but risky. Bait the traffickers by pretending the school was unaware, letting the meeting play out until the suspects revealed themselves. The team had learned from Bishop's files that someone would attempt to make contact tonight, perhaps even snatch another child in the chaos of dismissal. It was the kind of risk no one wanted to take, but every other option had failed. Deanna scanned the crowd. Her mind replayed every moment with Zoe, every instinct she'd once doubted. Tonight, she would not hesitate. Tonight, she would trust her gut, and trust shadows even more. The first hour passed slowly. Speeches, handshakes, the clink of coffee cups. Then, a lull. Shadow suddenly stiffened, head turning to the far doors, nose working the air. Deanna followed his gaze, just as a delivery van pulled into the lot, headlights off. A man in a delivery uniform stepped out, carrying a clipboard and a large package. He moved with purpose, blending in, his face forgettable, but Shadow's growl cut through the din, a low, unmistakable warning. Deanna's heart slammed in her chest. She tapped her radio. "He's here, north exit." The undercover team sprang to life. The man moved swiftly down the side corridor, away from the main event, scanning for a target. A little girl, Emily Sanchez, had wandered from her mother, idly kicking her backpack against the lockers. The man called out to her, soft, persuasive, but Shadow lunged, yanking Deanna forward. The dog barked, sharp and urgent, barreling down the hall between the man and the girl. The man froze, just long enough for 2 officers to seize him, pinning him to the ground. Panic erupted. Parents scrambled. Teachers called for order, but the officers were quick, practiced, moving the man away as quietly as possible. Emily's mother rushed down the hall, scooping her daughter into her arms, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. In the aftermath, Shadow pressed close to the girl, nuzzling her gently. Emily, breathless, whispered, "Thank you, doggy," clutching his thick fur as if it were a lifeline. Deanna hugged the wall, letting the adrenaline drain. She found Maya's mother in the crowd, who threw her arms around her daughter, both of them sobbing with joy and terror. "You saved her!" Maya's mother cried, her gratitude raw and trembling. But the work was far from over. In the hours that followed, the FBI interrogated the suspect. His phone, unlocked in a moment of panic, revealed messages, drop points, payments, names. It was all there. Proof that this was not a lone predator, but a branch of an international trafficking ring. They had moved children from city to city, using fake documents, planned routes, and careful surveillance. A map found in the van matched locations on the USB. Dozens of children, coordinated pickups, schedules, payments, code names. The team realized with cold horror that they'd intercepted the network at the edge of something much larger. They would need to move fast, across borders, through agencies, every second counting. That night, as the city fell quiet and the rec center lights flickered off, Deanna sat in the back of her squad car with Shadow beside her. She ran her fingers through his fur, silent tears streaking her face. "You did it, boy," she whispered. "You saw what we missed. You always do." Shadow leaned against her, his breath deep and slow, eyes half closed. For him, the work was simple: protect the vulnerable, stand in the way of darkness. By dawn, headlines ran wild. Hero dog and police thwart child trafficking attempt. But for Deanna and the parents, the relief was fragile, the fear still raw. Maya's mother, Emily's family, and the other parents hugged their children tighter, promising never to let them out of sight. But for the first time, there was hope, real hope, that the network was crumbling. Thanks to a little girl's courage, a mother's determination, and the unwavering loyalty of a scarred old German shepherd, the tide was turning. Shadow padded into the sunlight, tail high, every step a promise. As long as he was there, no child would be invisible, and no evil would go unseen. It started just after midnight, in the humming blue glow of the FBI war room, with a map spread across the table and the sound of rain hammering Denver's streets. Deanna Evans sat shoulder to shoulder with federal agents, local detectives, and a clutch of sleep-starved analysts. Shadow lay at her feet, always within arm's reach, his breathing slow and calm, even as the air vibrated with tension. The sting at the rec center had cracked everything open. The suspect's unlocked phone, together with the files from Bishop's USB, lit up the network like constellations. Faces, names, encrypted accounts, plans that stretched from Meadow Creek all the way to Prague and back. There were photographs of missing children, e-tickets, bank records, and GPS trails crisscrossing Europe and the U.S. Each new revelation made the scope seem more monstrous, more impossible to chase down. But impossibility had never stopped Zoe Carter or her loyal Shadow, and it would not stop Deanna or the web of law enforcement now moving in unison. The plan was precise. At 7:00 a.m., Denver time, teams would move simultaneously in 3 cities, Seattle, Prague, and Denver. There would be no time for errors. For every child on their list, the margin for failure was razor thin. Deanna clutched a mug of bitter coffee, trying to anchor herself. Her eyes flicked to Shadow, who, for all the chaos, exuded a steady, patient calm. He had become a mascot in the war room, everyone pausing to scratch his ears or offer a reassuring pat. But to Deanna, he was something more, a promise that they would not let fear win. As dawn crept over the city, she video-called Zoe and Anna. Zoe was up early, Shadow's blanket draped over her shoulders, drawing pictures at the kitchen table. "Are you catching the bad guys?" Zoe asked, her voice strong, less like the frightened girl of last week and more like someone who knew what courage cost. "We're close, kiddo," Deanna said, "and Shadow's right here. He misses you." Zoe's eyes shone. "Tell him I drew him with a superhero cape, and tell him I'm not scared anymore." That was enough. Deanna smiled, heart steadied. "I will. And you did this, Zoe. You and Shadow." Minutes before the operation began, a team member pressed a photo into Deanna's hand, a grainy image of Lily Farkas last seen months ago in Prague. The pink unicorn cap found in Bishop's briefcase was hers. The countdown began. Headsets buzzed. Shadows flickered across screens. In Denver, an unmarked van pulled up outside a shuttered house. In Seattle, plainclothes officers closed in on a busy bus terminal. In Prague, Czech police in civilian clothes hovered near a faded playground. At precisely 7:00, the world moved. In Denver, Deanna watched the SWAT team breach the front door. Inside, they found 2 children, frightened but unharmed, huddled together on a battered sofa. In Seattle, a handler led Shadow through a warren of luggage racks, where his nose caught the scent. He pulled an officer to a back storeroom, where 3 children waited in silence, hands clasped. In Prague, officers intercepted a man leading a small girl, Lily, away from a public square. The crackle of radios and cheers of relief filled the air. Deanna listened to every update, her breath catching each time she heard, "Child recovered." When word came that Lily had been found, still wearing the same unicorn cap, a cheer erupted. For a moment, agents hugged, cried, and let themselves feel victory. Parents flooded police stations. Some wept, some collapsed, some simply cradled their children in silent awe. Lily's mother kissed her daughter's hair, repeating, "You're safe, you're safe," until her voice broke. Shadow was led through the Denver house, pausing by each child, letting them pet his nose or bury their faces in his fur. His calm steadied them when words couldn't. Even the oldest child, a boy of 12, reached out and grabbed Shadow's neck, whispering, "Thank you, dog." Back at the war room, Deanna felt herself break for a moment, her own tears coming in hot, grateful waves. She knelt down, pressing her forehead to Shadow's and whispering, "We did it, boy. You did it." The official commendations followed quickly, and the FBI director, reporters, and local dignitaries flooded the screens and news feeds, all echoing one refrain. The break in the case came from a girl's courage and a dog's instinct. Zoe Carter and Shadow became symbols, proof that sometimes the first domino was not a badge or a gun, but a feeling in a child's heart and a growl from a retired K-9's throat. By sunset, the Denver station was packed with hugs, laughter, and the kind of relief that feels close to exhaustion. Shadow, for his part, simply found a quiet corner and settled in, paws crossed, eyes half closed, content to rest at last. Outside, Deanna stepped into the golden evening, phone to her ear. She called Anna and Zoe, letting them hear the sounds of children laughing, families reunited. "They're safe, Zoe. You helped save them." On the other end, Zoe whispered, "Tell Shadow I love him. Tell him. He's my hero." Deanna wiped her eyes, smiling through the tears. "He knows, Zoe." We all do. For one night at least, the darkness receded. For every life saved, every child returned. It was clear. Sometimes hope arrives with fur, a nose for danger, and a heart that never, ever gives up. By the time the sun broke free over Meadow Creek, the whole town felt different. There were more children at the park that Saturday morning, more laughter in the air, and a new mural in chalk stretched along the school wall, a great noble German shepherd with soft eyes and a circle of smiling kids at his feet. Someone had drawn a superhero cape around his shoulders and written "Shadow Saves" in careful block letters. The local news van parked outside the community center, but nobody seemed to mind. Today was about celebration and healing, not headlines. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows as families, teachers, and police officers gathered for a ceremony that had been thrown together with grateful urgency. It was a rare day. Nobody wanted to rush. Every person in the room was present, holding on to each moment, letting the weight of the past weeks finally settle. At the front of the hall, a long table was crowded with trophies, ribbons, and framed photos. Zoe sat in the first row, her feet swinging above the floor, hair in neat braids, a pale blue dress pressed just for the occasion. Anna sat beside her, eyes shining, arm draped gently across Zoe's shoulders. Shadow, freshly brushed and dignified as ever, paced the aisle at Deanna's heel. His new vest gleamed, but his head hung low, not from shame or weariness, but from the steady humility of a hero who never needed applause. Even the smallest kids seemed to sense it. Wherever Shadow went, children reached out, laying shy hands on his fur, leaving him with soft stickers or crayon-drawn medals. When the ceremony began, the principal's voice trembled with emotion. "We're not just here to honor bravery, but to remind ourselves of what community means." He gestured to Zoe and Shadow. "Our world is safer, our hearts braver, because these two trusted their instincts and each other." The applause was warm and real, not loud, but full of something that felt like hope. Zoe stood when called, cheeks flushed. She clutched a sheet of paper and walked up to the podium, her shoes tapping on the polished floor. The room hushed. Every adult leaned forward. Every child watched her with wide eyes. Zoe's voice was clear, a little shaky at first, but stronger with each word. "When I was scared, Shadow listened. When I tried to tell grown-ups, some didn't believe me, but Officer Evans did. And my mom did, and Shadow always did." She paused, looking at the dog by her side. "Sometimes being brave isn't about fighting. It's about telling the truth, even if your voice shakes." She smiled at Shadow, then at Deanna. "He's my hero, but anyone can listen. Anyone can help." The applause came again, and this time Zoe felt it, not as noise, but as a quiet wave of love that made her stand a little taller. Deanna took the stage next. She had never been one for speeches, but today she spoke from the heart. "I almost made the wrong choice," she admitted, eyes searching the crowd. "I almost trusted paperwork instead of instinct. But Shadow didn't need rules. He just needed to listen to the child in front of him. Her voice faltered. We all learned something this week. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is believe. The mayor presented Shadow with a hero's medal, a broad blue ribbon that he wore with a kind of gentle confusion. Zoe pinned her own crayon medal to his vest, and when she hugged him, Shadow let out a soft sigh, settling at her feet with the dignity of a knight. After the ceremony, people crowded around for photos and handshakes. Some families brought their own dogs, hoping a little of Shadow's courage would rub off. Others simply wanted to thank him, or Zoe, or Anna, or Deanna, anyone who had stood between fear and the future. Deanna slipped away after a while, letting Shadow soak up the attention. She found Anna standing by the window, a rare moment of quiet in the buzz of celebration. "Thank you," Anna said, her voice steady but her eyes shining. "You didn't just save Zoe. You saved me too." Deanna shook her head. It was Zoe. It was Shadow. It was everyone who listened, even when it was hard. Anna looked out at the playground, where Zoe and Shadow now played, a tangle of laughter and fur. "I want to do more. I want to help other families." Deanna nodded, seeing in Anna the same fire she'd seen in Zoe. "You already are." That afternoon, the news went national. Shadow's story, a retired police dog who had saved children from a trafficking ring, captured hearts everywhere. Messages poured in, thank yous from strangers, offers of support, families who shared their own stories of close calls, quiet heroes, and the power of listening. By the end of the day, the whole town felt different. Other families came forward, sharing stories of moments when Shadow had offered comfort or sensed trouble. Teachers remembered the times he'd nuzzled anxious students, guided lost kids, or simply sat by those who needed a friend. The mayor announced that Shadow would visit schools across the county, spreading not just comfort, but a lesson. Listen, trust, and never be afraid to speak up. Deanna, moved by a feeling she hadn't known in years, filed adoption papers. Shadow would live with her now, spending his days at schools, his nights dozing by her fire. Zoe hugged Shadow in the last light of evening, resting her cheek against his neck. "You're my hero," she whispered. Shadow closed his eyes, the sounds of celebration fading as peace finally settled into his bones. For the first time in a long time, Meadow Creek felt whole. Shadow's legacy would live on, not just as a story in the news, but as a lesson in every classroom, every playground, and every heart that knew what it meant to be truly seen. By the time Safety Awareness Day arrived at Meadow Creek Elementary, summer had settled over the town like a warm, steady breath. The front lawn buzzed with activity, tables piled with safety pamphlets, police cars shining in the sun, and a line of therapy dogs with their handlers, tails wagging in anticipation of sticky hands and shy smiles. The auditorium, usually echoing with school concerts or spelling bees, now hummed with something deeper, relief, gratitude, and the possibility of real change. Inside, families sat shoulder to shoulder, parents nodding to each other in recognition, teachers clustered near the stage, and clusters of children huddled with friends, talking in urgent whispers. Zoe sat in the front row, hair pulled back, Shadow's leash wrapped twice around her wrist. The dog lay calmly at her feet, his eyes bright, ears flicking at every small sound. This time, Zoe did not shrink into her seat. She glanced up at her mom, Anna, steady and proud, and at Officer Deanna Evans, whose uniform looked somehow more welcoming than before. All around them, faces shone with a hard-won joy, the kind that comes only after a storm has passed. The principal stepped to the microphone. Today isn't just about remembering what we've survived, but about learning what it takes to keep each other safe. We honor those who listened, those who spoke up, and those who acted with courage, no matter how scared they were. The lights softened. Zoe and Deanna walked on stage together. The auditorium stilled as Zoe, not so little anymore, held Shadow's leash and faced her classmates, teachers, and the town that now felt like family. She spoke with the same quiet, fierce honesty that had saved her life. When I was scared, Shadow listened. And Officer Evans believed me, even when it was hard. Her hands trembled, but she held the microphone steady. I learned that sometimes being brave just means saying what you feel, even if your voice shakes. You don't have to fight alone. You just have to speak up, and someone will hear you. There was a long, thoughtful silence. Even the younger children seemed to understand that something real had just happened. The auditorium, for once, was a room where every voice felt important. Then it was Deanna's turn. She cleared her throat, her words softer, less practiced. I almost followed the rules instead of my instincts. I almost missed the truth because it was easier to trust paperwork than people. She glanced at Zoe, then at Shadow. But Shadow didn't care about documents. He cared about Zoe. And Zoe reminded me that the bravest voices are sometimes the quietest ones. She paused, searching the crowd. We all have rules to follow, but sometimes the most important rule is to listen, really listen, even when it's hard or inconvenient or scary. Shadow's gift was never about strength or speed. It was about being present, about trust. The principal invited Zoe to the front again. With hands only a little unsteady, Zoe received a courage medal, which she wore proudly next to Shadow's. Cameras flashed, but Zoe hardly seemed to notice. Other children, inspired by her example, lined up to tell their own stories, moments when they felt unsafe, times when they found the courage to speak up, even if it was only to a friend or a teacher or sometimes a dog. As the assembly continued, the mood shifted from solemn to bright. Children hugged their parents a little tighter. Teachers promised to pay closer attention. The auditorium, once filled with worry, now crackled with the promise of something new, a commitment to listening, to watching out for each other, to being brave in small, everyday ways. Shadow wandered the aisles, greeting students, accepting hugs and pats, soaking in the celebration with the calm of a dog who has seen the worst and helped bring out the best. His eyes always seemed to search for Zoe, his person, but he stopped for every child who looked uncertain, offering the silent comfort that only animals can give. By the end of the day, Shadow's lesson became a phrase whispered around the school. It wasn't just about being vigilant or following rules. It was about the quiet strength of paying attention, of listening even when it was easier not to, of trusting the instincts that sometimes made no sense until everything was on the line. Outside, under the shade of the big oak tree, Anna hugged Zoe close. "You're so brave," she said, her voice breaking a little. "You showed the whole town what courage looks like." Zoe hugged her back, glancing at Shadow, who lay at her feet. "I wasn't brave alone, Mom. Shadow listened. Officer Evans believed me, and you never stopped holding on." Deanna joined them, kneeling beside Shadow, rubbing his ears. "You know," she said, smiling, "this old dog's going to be a legend around here." Anna grinned. "He already is." Nearby, the mayor announced the new Shadow Patrols, teams of students, parents, teachers, and therapy dogs watching out for each other at every school. It was a small change, maybe, but for Meadow Creek, it meant everything. As the afternoon faded, Zoe watched other kids playing, their laughter ringing out, louder, freer, safer than before. She held her courage medal, feeling its weight, not just as an honor, but as a reminder that her voice mattered. Before they left, Zoe stood on the auditorium steps, Shadow beside her. She spoke softly, but her words lingered. "If you ever feel scared or alone, remember, you're not invisible. Someone will listen. And sometimes, heroes have fur and 4 paws." The crowd parted, making way for Zoe and Shadow as they walked home, side by side, a little girl and her guardian, their bond unbreakable, their story now part of everyone who had listened and learned. Sunset spilled gold across Meadow Creek Park, painting the trees in hues of honey and tangerine. The town's summer picnic was winding down, kids racing through grass stained by weeks of heavy rain, parents chatting in gentle clusters beneath swaying lanterns. Music drifted over the breeze, soft, warm, the kind that settles into the bones. It was the kind of evening that felt like a promise. Everything that had been broken might someday be whole again. On a patchwork quilt beneath the largest oak tree, Zoe Carter sat with Shadow sprawled beside her, head in her lap. She combed his fur with her fingers, humming softly to herself, lost in the rhythm of the dog's breathing. Nearby, Anna arranged the remains of a picnic dinner, strawberries, sandwiches, lemonade. Officer Deanna Evans sat on the grass, boots untied, badge tucked away, finally allowing herself to relax. For the first time in what felt like forever, the only things Zoe noticed were simple and beautiful. The glow of fireflies in the grass, the sound of distant laughter, the gentle weight of Shadow's head against her legs. All the fear, the confusion, the nightmares, the clinging sense of danger hadn't vanished. But here, beneath the old tree, with her family and her friend, she found room to breathe again. A group of children ran past, waving, calling out for Zoe to join them. She waved back, but didn't move. Instead, she bent low, whispering, "I was scared, but you made me brave." Shadow's tail thumped lazily. He looked up at her with soft, knowing eyes, and in that silent moment, Zoe felt understood in a way that went deeper than words. Anna watched them with a quiet smile, a kind of peace settling into her shoulders that hadn't been there in months. She moved to sit beside Deanna, both women looking out over the picnic, their worries momentarily suspended. Anna broke the silence first. "I never realized how much listening matters. When no one believed Zoe, when I almost doubted." She paused, voice thickening. "You showed us what it means to trust someone. You taught us that listening is the first act of protection." Deanna nodded, brushing a blade of grass between her fingers. "And Shadow taught me that sometimes the heart knows what the head can't see. He didn't wait for proof. He just acted." Maybe that's what real courage is. Across the field, the school principal stood on a makeshift stage, microphone in hand. "Before we finish tonight, I have one more announcement." The crowd quieted, faces turning expectant. "Starting next year, every school in our district will have shadow patrols, teams of students and adults working together to keep our community safe. Because what we've learned here is that everyone matters, every voice, every instinct, every child." Applause swept through the crowd, genuine and grateful. Some people cried, some hugged their children tighter. It wasn't just a program, it was a sign that Meadow Creek had changed, that what started as one child's terror had grown into a collective promise. As dusk deepened, lanterns flickered to life. Zoe stood beneath the tree, Shadow by her side. Anna joined her, hand warm and steady on her shoulder. Deanna approached, badge now visible, a gentle smile on her face. For a long, quiet moment, they simply looked at one another. The girl who had been scared but spoke out, the mother who learned to listen, the officer who chose trust, and the dog whose courage changed everything. Zoe knelt in the grass, speaking so only Shadow could hear. "It still hurts sometimes, but you taught me I'm not alone. Even when I'm afraid, there's always someone who will listen, even if that someone has fur and 4 paws." Shadow licked her cheek, eyes closing in contentment. Anna turned to the gathered parents, her voice carrying over the crowd. "We can't erase what happened, but we can change how we move forward. Listen to your children. Trust your instincts. We are all protectors." Deanna, her voice gentle but unwavering, added, "Safety isn't just the job of police. It's all of us, looking out for each other, listening, stepping up when it matters." The principal closed the ceremony with a wish. "May we always remember Shadow's lesson. Sometimes the smallest voice or the quietest bark is the very thing that keeps us safe." The evening lingered, full of small kindnesses and shared smiles. Shadow wandered among the picnic blankets, receiving hugs and sneaked treats, his legacy growing with every gentle touch. Zoe watched him, her courage metal glinting in the lantern light, and knew their story had become part of the fabric of Meadow Creek, a reminder that hope is not the absence of fear, but the choice to reach for each other through it. As the stars blinked on overhead, Zoe turned to face the crowd, her voice strong. "If you ever feel scared or alone, remember, you're not invisible. Someone will listen, and sometimes heroes have fur and 4 paws." A hush followed, then a gentle ripple of applause. The town, once fractured by fear, was stitched together by the quiet courage of a girl, a dog, and all those who had chosen to listen.